Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Audi Cycling YouTube channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Velogames Paris-Roubaix. We're taking a look at the men's classic squad game and also the Super Classico Sixes game. And I'll also show you my women's team, despite the fact that I am recording this as the Paris-Roubaix FAM is going on. But I'll just show you my team anyway, just for the hell of it. But let's take a look at, firstly, the Super Classico game. Of course, you've got the two expensive riders of Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert. Both of these are good choices, and you could also just pick both of them if you wanted to, which is probably a very safe move to be going with, considering that they were a part of probably the strongest people in the race last weekend at the Tour of Flanders. Of course, there's no Pogacar here in this race, so therefore you can just pick both of them, which is a pretty good move, to be honest with you. If you're basing your picks off of form, you'd probably be picking Mathieu van der Poel. But if you're basing your team based upon team strength, then you're probably going to be picking Wout van Aert. This is a race which, if you say, for example, Quick-Step, if you look at them, they have really done well in this race over the past decade, 15 years or so, because of their team depth and their strength and numbers which they have. So if you think that the race is going to be decided based upon kind of moves going between the cobbled sectors, because, Jumbo have got Wout van Aert, Christophe Laporte, and a returning Dylan van Baarle. If you could, you can base your picks based upon Jumbo Visma dominating the race, and that is certainly a pretty good one to be going with. But you could also say that Mathieu van der Poel is just in better form. So both of them are good choices, and I think you could go either way. If you wanted to play it safe, just pick both of them. The 26-point riders of De Lee, Mohoric and Philipsen, I'm not really tempted by any of them. Mohoric probably is the best one of the three, considering that he is better at Roubaix than the other two. The other two are kind of more sprinter types, and I just don't see them really competing that highly in this race. Mohoric, on the other hand, came 5th in this race last year, so probably a better choice, but he did crash at Flanders last week, and I'm not sure how he's going after that. It might be safer to pick a 24-point rider. Asgreen, for example, was looking really good at Flanders last weekend. I expect a lot of people to not be picking him just because Quick-Step haven't looked very good this season at all, but I think Asgreen showed some good form last weekend and could certainly be a bit of a dark horse and perhaps a differential pick if you're looking for somebody a bit different. Probably the safest 24-point rider is Mads Pedersen, just because he was looking sensational at Flanders, and I'm thinking of probably putting Pedersen onto my team, because if it comes down to, say somebody gets up the road into a move and then Pedersen's sprinting from a group behind for 4th or 5th place, he's probably going to be winning that, considering that his sprint at the end of a long day is really good. We've seen that at 2019 World Championships. We saw it at Flanders last weekend. So Pedersen's a very safe pick, I believe. So probably one which I'd be strongly recommending people put onto their team. Van Baarle's a tricky one because, of course, he won last year, but he was 18 credits last year. And also he's coming out of illness, so therefore we don't really know how he's going, which does make me a bit apprehensive about picking him, just because I like to have a bit of a form gauge on somebody. It, in my opinion, is safer to probably go with Laporte, just because we saw that Laporte was there kind of last weekend at Flanders. Although he wasn't able to follow the moves, I think the flatter terrain will suit him better. Van Baarle is probably still a good pick if you're wanting just the Jumbo Visma dominance, but I'm just a little bit wary about him, is basically my opinion, just because I would prefer it if he would have competed at Flanders. But saying that, Jumbo Visma riders do have a tendency to really come out of the blue and just kind of smash it out the park, so it wouldn't surprise me if Van Baarle did well. Kung is an interesting one as well, kind of similar to Asgreen in that he's a very rouleur type, but he probably won't have that much support late into the race. But Kung is a rider who was looking good at Flanders last weekend, and, after looking good in Flanders last year, he then went on to podium this race. So it wouldn't surprise me if Kung podium this race again, to be honest with you. And if he gets into the right move with, a Dylan van Baarle, for example, he could certainly do really well in this race. So I think Kung is also a good choice. Lampard, haven't really seen too much of him, to be honest with you. I know he does really well in this race usually, but I'm not willing to really risk it on a hunch, to be honest. Stuyven will probably be a domestique. I think Laporte's a good one. I really like him in terms of his finishing ability and also his consistency in the Cobble Classics so far this year. He's just getting things right, and he's also part of the Jumbo Visma kind of whole crazy good team in this race. So Laporte, I think, is also a very good one. Ganna's an interesting one as well. I'm seeing a lot of hype around Ganna. Apparently he's specifically trained for this kind of race. He's won the junior race, although that doesn't really mean too much, considering that people who win that race don't really tend to do that great in their career, apart from a few people. Ganna's, yeah, he's just a tricky one. He will be leading Ineos, that he is going to be the team leader, but I'm just not certain about him, just because he's never done that great in a one day race. I know you could say like, well, San Remo, he came 10th for E3, but like he was dropped way back in like E3. It is different though because it's Roubaix and it's flat, so could Ganna finish in the top 10? Yes, but it's a little bit of a risk, I think, just because we haven't seen him do brilliantly in Cobble Classics, so therefore I just have some caution about picking him. Ivan Garcia Cortina will probably finish top 15. He's pretty consistent. Mayus, probably not. Although he is a very kind of Cobble Classics kind of rider, I think they'll probably be working for Pollitt, but Mayus could certainly sprint through a group to finish maybe top 20, I reckon. Sagan just hasn't looked that great. Trentin's actually quite good when you consider that Pogacar isn't here. Trentin is going to be the leader. That's what UE are saying in their press release. And also, he was looking good at Flanders, considering that he finished like 11th, despite the fact that he was helping Pogacar when Pogacar bridged up to them. Really good from Trentin. And I think that he could certainly come top 10. I think that's a pretty realistic ambition that he should be having. Greg, nah. Ackerman, Hofstetter, Seneschal, just no. Just none of these guys are really jumping out at me, to be honest with you. None of them have shown massive leaps and bounds in form. Sepp Van Mark does have a tendency just to do really good in this race, just out of nowhere, so it wouldn't surprise me if he did good. He was looking alright again. Velogames finished on the podium there, and he also did okay in Flanders. I can't remember where he finished, but decent enough. So I think that Sepp's probably the best 18-point rider. I'd love to recommend a Seneschal or a Turgis or Hofstetter or whatever, but they just haven't shown the form so far this season. Fred Wright will probably, again, top 10 candidate for sure. Him and Mohoric are a pretty decent combo to be having. So I think with Fred Wright might be a little bit expensive at 18, but probably worthwhile mentioning. 16-point riders, Pollitt's probably your best shout, considering that he's had the best results of all these 16-point riders. He's of course finished on the podium in this race before, so Pollitt's likely your best 16-point rider. Maybe Turnison as well, but I just haven't seen enough of Turnison. Edward Turns will probably be working for Pedersen. 14-point riders, Mathis Louvel, probably a decent one. I had him on my team last year when he was 6 credits, and I think he finished 15th or something like that, so that's not bad, but you'd certainly be looking for more out of a 14-point rider. But he has been very consistent in these Cobble Classics, so I think a top 20 from Louvel is almost a guarantee. You could say Sheffield, but he hasn't looked that great so far this season, so maybe not. Rasmus Tiller as well, just a big kind of rouleur type. Vermeersch, of course, again, another guy's finished on the podium in this race before. I mean, a very wet edition, so probably, put a little asterisk next to that one. 12-point riders, not that many, which I like, to be honest with you. Maybe Gianni Vermeersch, like possibly for a domestique who gets late into the race with Van der Poel. 10-point riders, of course, De Vrint finished, I think it was 4th last year, De Vrint finished, but he was like 6 credits last year, so that's why he's now 10 points, but I'm not willing to gamble that he's going to do the same again. I think that was just a little bit, you just got in the right moves in the right time, and it's no real kind of, that 4th place wasn't entirely representative of his ability. It sounds a bit offensive, but it's just kind of the way it is. De Wolf, not bad. Kelland O'Brien does have a tendency to get into these Cobble Classic breakaways, which is a good thing for Roubaix because they do tend to make it quite far into the race. So O'Brien could be a bit of a gamble at 10, but possibly worthwhile taking. There's also Marlene van den Berg, quite a young, talented sprinter type for EF. But Nathan van Hooijdonk is another great 10-point rider. Really good form at the moment. Should be finishing top 20. Could get assist points on any number of Jumbo Visma riders. So I think Nathan van Hooijdonk is your safest 10-point rider. You could gamble on some other ones getting into the breakaway. 8-point riders, there just aren't many which I like the look of. Like you could go with Affini or Dillier for the assist points on the respective leaders of Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel. But again, it's a bit silly doing that when you consider that there are 6-point riders who can do the exact same thing. But other than that, there just aren't that many great 8-point riders, to be honest with you. I just don't. Maybe Tom van Asbrook, he does okay in this race. He has done in the past. 6-point riders, there are a few more to be picking from. I'd say the best one is probably Michael Bjerg, considering that he finished 15th in Flanders, and without Pogacar, he will certainly have a bit more free reign in this race, and it's more of a rouleur's race rather than a puncher's race in Flanders. So I'll say that Bjerg has a better chance of doing well in this race, and at 6 points you really can't go that wrong. There's also a lot of EF guys like Oeindul, Jonas Ruch, for example. They're quite decent ones as well. Nils Akoff, another good one to be possibly picking up. Dan Hula, probably working for Pedersen, but the kind of rider who should be doing well in this race, big tall guy like him. So he's probably a decent one. Lascano's back. I think he crashed in Flanders, but he finished second at Dwars Door, so you might want to consider putting him on, considering that he's probably one of the better Movistar riders in their team. Matthias Norsgaard usually gets him a break, but it is going to be a heavily contested breakaway to try and get into, so bear that in mind. He won't just kind of slip into it like he usually does. I think it'll be a lot harder. Rui Oliveira, again, will have freedom with no Pogacar being here. Jonas Ruch, I think, is probably my second favourite rider in the 6 point category, just because he finished 11th in that wet edition and he fulfills the category of somebody who should be doing well in this race. So I think that Ruch is probably a good one to be going with. Considering that EF don't have an out and out leader, I think that Ruch has the chance of doing really well in this race. Tim van Dijk for the assist points on Wout. Guillaume van Kielsbroek, again, he got in the break in Flanders, in Ghent Wevelgem, and also in Kern-Brussels-Kern. So he's pretty good at getting him a breakaway in these, and he's, again, just a big ruler type. So I think that Kielsbroek could be a really good one to be putting on. He might get him a break, and he could get far into this race. But again, bit of a risk, but at 6 points, you're not risking too much, are you? 4 point riders, probably Frison is the best one. There's also Josh Tarling. A lot of people hyped about Josh Tarling. Big, kind of, he's just a tall 1m88, freaking 80 whatever kilo guy. But you have to bear in mind he's like 19. And there's Ganna here, so will he have the freedom to do it? Probably not. Frison is likely the better 4 point rider, and all the other ones are just kind of very miscellaneous riders. They could get him a breakaway if you're lucky, so really your guess is as good as mine in this case. This is the team that I have at the moment, with a bit of Jumbo Visma dominance, but also Pedersen in there, and then Bjerg and Kielsbroek as my 6 point riders. I could also put in Van der Poel. I could also not go with Pedersen, and I could go with Dylan van Baal. If you really just wanted to just fully lock out Jumbo Visma, go with that. And, you could even put on Tim van Dijk as well if you wanted him. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't really plan to stray too far from this structure. I think that I might put in a Van der Poel instead of Wout van Aert, or maybe I'll put in a Van Baal instead of a Mats Pedersen, but I doubt it. Or maybe I'll put in a Stefan Kung instead of a Laporte. So it's a pretty rigid formula that I've got going into this race. But let's take a look at the classic squad game and show you what I'm doing in terms of transfers. So for the classic squad game, all that I've done so far is I've transferred in Pedersen. From the last race in Scheldeprijs, we had Philipsen left over and I swapped out Jacobsen. I might still swap out Groenewegen and Philipsen for like an 8 point rider. I might put in Paulus, anticipating the Ardennes, and then I could put in a 12 point rider like Christophe Laporte. I've got 10 credits left to use, so I'm expecting Blabon-Sipel is going to be a big switch, and I'm going to be kind of putting in a lot more of the kind of Ardennes Star Race riders, like a Paulus, like an Andreas Kron, Pidcock, etc, etc. I had Wout van Aert and Van der Poel left over from Flanders, so this is the whole team that we got going into this race. Philipsen, Pedersen, Wout van Aert, Van der Poel, and then a couple of guys in the 4 point category. But yeah, we might swap out Philipsen and Groenewegen for a Laporte and a Paulus, more than likely. And then going into the women's race, for the women's race, I went with this. So we've got Kopecky, because it's Lotte Kopecky. Why would you not pick her? Elisa Longa Borghini, because she's finished 1st and 3rd in this race. Lucinda Brand. Again, I just think that Trek are going to do really well in this race, so that's why I went with her. 14 credits as well, quite cheap, I think, for a rider who fulfills, she should be doing well in this race. I think she has done in the past. Then we've got Pfeiffer Georgie, just another kind of ruler type, very well all-rounded. I'd be surprised if she finished outside the top 10. And then we've got Schweinberger and Van der Down as my 6 point riders. I think you could have gone with some other ones, but I've decided that these were my favourite ones. Let me know in the comments